Week 15 of the fantasy football season. Here's top 20 quarterbacks I'm ranking this week, so with the first week of the playoffs and a full slate now. Some of these rankings were definitely a little different than usual, putting these quarterbacks together going into the week. Number one, Lamar Jackson of the Baltimore Ravens. Ravens coming off a bye week. They're coming off a tough loss 2 weeks ago versus the Philadelphia Eagles. And Lamar, what a matchup it is this week at the New York Giants. Their defense can't stop anyone. This team, like I said, they're well rested now, getting back to the drawing board. And this week in New York, I think Lamar, he runs wild, he throws wild, has a big game this week. Number two, Josh Allen of the Buffalo Bills, first quarterback off the board, and rightfully so. And pretty much him and Lamar easily have ran away from the pack as the top quarterbacks in fantasy football this season. So this week in a potential high-scoring game, once again at the Lions, and we saw last week 6 touchdowns for Josh Allen, first player ever, 3 passing, 3 rushing touchdowns as a quarterback. I believe once again he goes out there and it's a good ball game. Number 3, Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals. What a great season it's been for Burrow, but obviously not a great season for this Bengal team, 5-8 on the year. But Joe Burrow's got a big arm, and when you got one wide receiver like Jamar Chase, it makes everything easier. So every week it seems like he's locked in 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, and this week in a good matchup at the Titans, I think we see more of the same. Number 4, Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Jalen Hurts, it's been a pretty good season this year for Jalen Hurts. But the thing is, these Eagle fans, they're still not satisfied. I know last week was a close game and his fantasy numbers weren't great. But this week, with all the scrutiny and a matchup where they really got to go out there and focus if they want to win this ball game versus a good Steelers team, I think Hurts bounces back. I think him and A.J. Brown, with that little criticism or whatever was going on there, that's a non-factor, and we see Brown get the football early and often. And Jalen Hurts, for the most part, he's been one of the best quarterbacks in fantasy football. Once again, so even in a tough matchup, I think he goes out there and quiets the noise. Number 5, Jaden Daniels of the Washington Commanders. So Jaden Daniels, it's been a great rookie season for him. We know he had a couple hiccups in the midweeks of the year with a rib injury, but now coming off a bye week and a good matchup on the fast track in New Orleans, I think Daniels could go out there, have one of his better games in the last month of the season. When you got guys like Terry McLaurin, Zach Ertz, Brian Robinson in the backfield, it's pretty solid offense. And with his running ability, you know when he's running, he's healthy. And the last few games, he started to run more. Once again, is Daniels. So this week, I like him as a top 5 option. Number 6, Tua of the Miami Dolphins. Ever since he returned to the lineup, this Dolphin offense, 27 or more points weekly pretty much. Tyreek Hill, he looks healthier. He had a nice game last week. Jalen Waddle finally starting to get things going. And the emergence of Jonnu Smith in his first season with this Dolphin team's having a big year. So I think Tua once again goes out there in a high-scoring game at Houston and puts up points, even though we know he's been way better throughout his career at home than he's been on the road. 7, Sam Darnold of the Minnesota Vikings. So what a season for Sam Darnold. And obviously this year saved his career because he was going to be a backup. And now he's going to get big money in free agency as Sam Darnold. So this week, a good matchup versus Chicago Bears. And when you got guys like Justin Jefferson, obviously, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, and Aaron Jones out of the backfield, you can be primed for some numbers. So last week, 5 touchdowns at the Falcons. This week, I don't see that happening, but I could see anywhere from 200, 250 yards, 2 or 3 touchdowns in this ball game, because we know the Chicago Bear defense isn't all that great. And going back a few weeks ago, it was a high-scoring game between these two teams. 30-27, Minnesota won in overtime. Number 8, Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions. What a season it's been for Goff, on arguably the best offense in all pro football. And when you got guys like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, and Sam Laporte in the backfield, Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, you're going to put up points, and those guys are going to put up points themselves. And obviously, the yards go to the quarterback throwing it. So this week in another high-scoring game, most likely, versus the Buffalo Bills, I think Jared Goff goes out there, has another nice performance. Number 9, Brock Purdy of the San Francisco 49ers. So we know this Niner team banged up Thursday Night Football. We know Christian McCaffrey, he's been out. Garendo, we'll see if he plays or if he's out in this ball game. And now, obviously, Brandon Ayuk, he's been out a while now for the season. Juwan Jennings, he stepped up. He's had some big games this season. George Kittle's playing good football. And Deebo Samuel, believe it or not, looks like he's the odd man out a little bit in this offense. But last week, it was a big game with Purdy, with Deebo Samuel only getting 5.5 fantasy points. And this week, in a potential high-scoring game versus division rival, the Rams. And usually these Thursday night games are high-scoring. I think he could go out there, have another good game. Number 10, Baker Mayfield of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Baker Mayfield, with Mike Evans back in the lineup, he's been locked in. this Buck team trying to make a late push for the playoffs, and now they're on a nice winning streak. And this week it is a tougher matchup at the Chargers, where their defense is a pretty decent unit, I believe. But when you got weapons like Mike Evans, Rachaad White out of the backfield, Bucky Irvin, Cade Otton, and then we saw Jalen McMillan last week have 2 touchdowns. This offense is starting to get going, even though Chris Godwin, we know, is out for the season. So Baker, he's the ultimate gunslinger as well. He gets that football down the field, and he's been putting up pretty elite numbers for the majority of the season. Number 11, Kyler Murray of the Arizona Cardinals. I know he might be a little low on my list is Kyler Murray, but it's just been one good week, one bad week for Murray, and he's been an inconsistent quarterback all season long. I know this week's a slam dunk matchup versus the New England Patriots that can't stop anyone, but Kyler Murray's been inconsistent, and we could see a game where they were off to an early lead, and it's the James Conner show in the second half, running out the clock and getting a lot of touches. So like I said, Kyler Murray coming into the year, I thought he would have a better season than he had last with guys like Marvin Harrison drafted, Trey McBride, another season under his belt, but that just hasn't been the case. He's been inconsistent, and in a spot here, even versus New England, I don't think he's a top 10 option. Number 12, Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams. So when this Ram offense is clicking, they put up a lot of points, and they put them up in a hurry. And we saw last week 44-42 victory versus the Bills. Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp had big games. Kyren Williams a big game. And this offense, one of the more explosive offenses in the league. So here tonight at San Francisco, Thursday night, usually high scoring, like I said. And Matthew Stafford, he's got that gunslinger mentality, even though we know he's a veteran in this league, and his career's at the back end, and he's still putting up numbers with elite wide receivers. 13, Bo Nix of the Denver Broncos. So Bo Nix, it's been a great rookie season for Nix, and him and Courtland Sutton are locked in. He's getting some yards on the ground as well, where he's got good mobility in the pocket, is Bo Nix. And he just has a knack of finding ways to win ball games and make plays when they need, is Bo Nix. So this week with a good matchup and coming off a bye week where he could get a little healthier as well, and even more into the playbook with rookies after the bye weeks, even though I know it's week 15. Sometimes that bye week, you add new plays, add new wrinkles to the playbook, and I think that can help Bo Nix once again this week in a good matchup. 14, Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Patrick Mahomes coming into the year, he was that third, fourth quarterback off the board. I know they have a lot of injuries on the year. Rashee Rice, he's missed majority of the season. Hollywood Brown, he hasn't played at all this season. Pacheco missed most of the season as well. But Mahomes now with the healthiest they could be, his numbers really haven't been eye-popping. And defenses, for the most part, they've played pretty well versus Chief offense, believe it or not, this season. But the Chiefs still 12-1 on the season. Their defense has carried them a lot in ball games, but when it's that last drive, Mahomes finds a way to drive down and get his team in field goal position. But this week at Cleveland, I could see a nice running performance from this Chiefs team. And like I said, Mahomes, his ceiling just hasn't been high this season for whatever reason. 15, Jordan Love of the Green Bay Packers. So Jordan Love, he came out off to a great start to begin the season, but now he's definitely slowed down. And this week, it's not the greatest of matchups with the Seattle Seahawks. This Packer receiving core, it's just been inconsistent. 1 week, someone goes off for a big game like Jaden Reed, and then last week we saw Jaden Reed have 0 points. And the same thing with Christian Watson. He's a boomer bust type of wide receiver. This Packer team, I know last week put 31 points on the board at the Lions, but still Jordan Love, he had a mediocre ball game. So this week, like I said, tough matchup. 12th man in Seattle. Crowd's going to be rowdy and loud. And Jordan Love, he's definitely not 100% in my opinion as well, is why his numbers haven't been great. 16, Justin Herbert of the Los Angeles Chargers. Talking about another quarterback who's not 100% healthy. He's banged up with the leg injury, but he gutted it out as usual in last week's ball game and the tough loss at the end of regulation at the Chiefs. So this week, Tampa Bay, good matchup. They're coming to town, and hopefully Ladd McConkey returns to this game, because he is a mini Cooper Kupp to me. The way he runs the routes and the way he plays the game is Ladd McConkey. So last week it was Quentin Johnson, Joshua Palmer, and they went out there, they made some plays, but Herbert's obviously upside's better with Ladd McConkey, and we know this Tampa Bay Buck DST isn't all that great as well, especially in the secondary. 17, Caleb Williams of the Chicago Bears. So it's been a mixed bag of results for the number 1 pick coming into the year in the NFL draft for Caleb Williams. And you thought with all these weapons, this Bear team would be a team to be reckoned with, but obviously that hasn't been the case. They fired their head coach, Matt Eberflus, a few weeks ago. Then they got blown out last week at the 49ers, and this week another game where they're going to be playing catch-up, I believe, like we saw a few weeks ago versus same Minnesota Viking team, where they were down big in that ball game, and they tied it and forced overtime, but lost 30 to 27 to Caleb Williams. I'll give him one thing: he don't turn the football over, but he's still holding on to it too long. He's Caleb Williams taking sacks, and there's a lot of plays where nothing's going on, and he has to throw it away as well. So this week in Minnesota, one of the best units in the league. I don't think the upside is there that much for Williams. I know he threw them back into the game a few weeks ago versus defense, but I don't see it happening again. So he's a back-end option, but I still would start him if he don't have any of these other options. 18, Aaron Rodgers of the New York Jets. Aaron Rodgers, first 300-yard game last week for the New York Jets. They got great weapons: Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, Breece Hall, if he plays in this ball game, and Allen Lazard's back off IR, one of Rodgers' favorite targets in his NFL career. And this week, it's a great matchup with the Jaguars. They can't stop anyone, one of the worst teams in the league. But Aaron Rodgers, if he's not scoring touchdowns, and we know his yards haven't been high this season, his ceiling really isn't high. But that 18, 20-point fantasy range has definitely been a thing this year for Rodgers, where he's been hitting that mark a few times. 19, Jameis Winston of the Cleveland Browns. So maybe I'm a little lower in this ball game for Jameis Winston. I know he's a gunslinger. He's got the big arm. Him, Jerry Jeudy, and David Njoku definitely locked in, and they've been putting up numbers over the last month of the season here. But this is a tough matchup with the Kansas City Chiefs coming to town. I know a few weeks ago in a tough matchup versus a great Bronco defense, he did go out there for 497 and 4 touchdowns and 3 interceptions in that game. But like I said, the ceiling, we saw last week versus a good defense in the Steelers. He only had 18 fantasy points. I think he could get 18 to 20 fantasy points, but I think the upside of the other quarterbacks ahead of him is why he's at 19 and the 20th and final quarterback I'm ranking. CJ Stroud of the Houston Texans. So Stroud, it's definitely been a down season for him. We know they're as healthy as they could be now. Joe Mixon, he's been back for multiple weeks. He's looked great this season. Nico Collins, he's been back a few weeks as well. And they're coming off the bye where a lot of guys are getting healthy on this roster. But CJ Stroud, it just hasn't been there this season. And I know the injuries have definitely been a part of it, but a lot of teams have obviously made him adjust, and he hasn't adjusted 100% as Stroud. So coming into the year, I thought it was going to be a big season. This week definitely could be a big game for Stroud with a great matchup versus the Dolphins that can't stop anyone, but going off track record and a win or go home situation in the playoffs here. I just can't trust him with not a high ceiling this season. So that's the top 20 quarterbacks I'm ranking for Week 15 of the fantasy football season.